The screaming started 3 sectors away. Captain Vex Thune of the Dominion cruiser Razorclaw felt the vibrations through his chitinous exoskeleton as his communications officer's mandibles clicked frantically over the console. Static-laced death. Cries poured from speakers across the bridge, each transmission cutting to silence with mechanical precision. "Another convoy!" hissed Navigator Kethmol, her compound eyes reflecting the crimson warning lights. The humans took them clean. 15 minutes, 37 vessels, 0 survivors. Vex Thune's primary arms tightened on his command throne. In the 3 years since humanity had declared war on the Galactic Dominion, their tactics had evolved, from desperate to terrifying. No longer the soft-bodied weaklings who begged for mercy at first contact, they had become something else entirely. Apex predators who hunted among the stars with cold, calculating fury. "Pattern analysis?" he demanded. "Same as the others," Kethmol replied, her voice barely containing her species' instinctive fear pheromones. "Single vessel, matte black hull, no energy signature until weapons hot. They call it the Harbinger of Sorrows. Crew of 200, all volunteers." The bridge fell silent except for the ambient hum of life support. Every being present knew the HFY Stories. Human ships didn't just destroy their enemies, they hunted them. Methodically, relentlessly. They would pursue a target across entire star systems, never stopping, never resting, until their prey was cornered and eliminated with surgical precision. "Fleet Admiral Nex Vara wants us to intercept," Vex Thune announced, reading the encrypted orders scrolling across his private display. "The human vessel is tracking Merchant Fleet Omega-7. We are to engage and destroy." A chorus of fearful chittering filled the air. Chief Weapons Officer Kraldesh, whose species had conquered 12 worlds before humanity ever left their homeworld, actually took a step backward. "Captain," he whispered, "the humans, they don't take prisoners, and they don't leave witnesses." Vex Thune studied the tactical display, watching the blinking icons representing their targets. The merchant fleet, 200 vessels carrying essential supplies to Dominion core worlds, was running at maximum burn toward the nexus point. Behind them, inexorably gaining, was a single black dot, the Harbinger of Sorrows. "They're just mammals," Vex Thune declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Soft-skinned bipeds who barely survived their own ice age. We are the evolved ones. We are the superior—" The communications array erupted with a transmission from Merchant Fleet Omega-7's flagship. Commodore Zalthek's normally composed demeanor had cracked, his tertiary voice sacs inflating with panic. "Razorclaw, this is Prosperity's dream. The black ship, it's almost in weapons range. They're not answering hails, not responding to surrender offers. By the Void Mothers, they're not even trying to board us. They just want us dead." The transmission cut to static. On the tactical display, the merchant fleet's formation began to scatter like frightened prey animals, each vessel desperately burning toward different vectors in a futile attempt to escape. The black dot continued its steady pursuit, unperturbed by their panic. "Set intercept course," Vex Thune ordered, his command voice steady despite the growing dread in his thorax. "Maximum burn. If we can catch them while they're focused on the merchants—" "Sir," Communications Officer Thelnix interrupted, her translator crackling with urgency. "Incoming message. It's from the human ship." On screen. The main display flickered, revealing a human face. Not the pink, soft features Vex Thune expected, but something harder, scarred, eyes like chips of ice in a face that might have been carved from asteroid rock. When the human spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Dominion vessel Razorclaw. This is Commander Wraith Volkov of the Terran Navy. You are interfering with a lawful military operation. Withdraw immediately, or you will be destroyed. This is your only warning." The transmission ended. Vex Thune stared at the dark screen, processing what he'd just heard. The human hadn't threatened them, he'd simply stated a fact, as if their destruction was as inevitable as stellar mechanics. "Sir?" Kethmol's voice was barely a whisper. "Orders?" The captain looked at his crew, seeing his own fear reflected in dozens of alien faces. But retreat meant abandoning 200 merchant vessels to certain death. And despite everything, he was still a warrior of the Dominion. "All ahead full," he commanded. "Battle stations! Today we show these humans what happens when they hunt the wrong prey." As Razorclaw accelerated toward its destiny, none of its crew noticed the small smile that had crossed Commander Volkov's scarred features before the transmission ended. Razorclaw dropped out of hyperspace like a metallic comet, its weapons systems already charging as the tactical display populated with contacts. The merchant fleet had scattered across a debris field, the remains of an ancient battle that had turned this region into a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen corpses. "Perfect hunting ground," muttered Weapons Officer Kraldesh, his mandibles clicking nervously. "The humans chose their battlefield well." Captain Vex Thun studied the holographic display, watching as the harbinger of sorrows glided between the wreckage like a predator moving through tall grass. The human ship was smaller than Razorclaw, barely half their mass, but something about its movement suggested lethal efficiency. "Range?" he demanded. 400,000 kilometers and closing, Navigator Kethmol reported. "They're not even trying to evade. Sir, I'm reading massive power fluctuations from their hull." The bridge lights dimmed as every system aboard Razorclaw suddenly surged and failed. Emergency lighting bathed the command center in hellish red as backup systems struggled to compensate. "What in the Void Mother's name?" "EMP burst!" Kraldesh shouted, his claws dancing over the weapons console. "Directed electromagnetic pulse, military grade. They fried our primary systems." Through the chaos, Captain Vex Thun heard something that made his exoskeleton crawl. Human laughter, transmitted on an open channel. Not the laughter of madness, but the cold amusement of a professional who had just executed a perfect opening. "Move." "Crew of the Razorclaw." Commander Volkov's voice filled the bridge, calm and conversational. "You have 17 minutes before your life support fails completely. Your weapons are offline, your engines are crippled, and your communications. Array is broadcasting on frequencies I can jam at will. I could destroy you right now. But I'm going to give you a choice." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the human ship's bridge. Volkov stood before a tactical display that showed Razorclaw's position with uncomfortable accuracy. Around him, other humans worked at their stations with mechanical precision. Not the frantic movements of beings in combat, but the calm efficiency of craftsmen at work. "You can stay and die fighting," Volkov continued, "or you can watch while I finish my mission. Either way, you're not leaving this system alive, but if you choose to watch, I'll make your deaths quick when I'm done with the merchants." "Captain," Communications Officer Thelnix whispered, her voice thick with species fear. "Our distress beacon, can we—" "Already jammed," Volkov said, as if he'd heard her. "No one is coming to help you. No one even knows you're here. This is between us and the 200 merchant vessels currently hiding in that debris field." Vex Thun felt something he'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty of death. Not the possibility of death that came with every battle, but the cold knowledge that he was already a corpse. He just hadn't stopped moving yet. "Why?" he asked, the word escaping before he could stop it. Volkov's scarred face shifted into something that might have been sympathy. "Because you started a war with a species that spent 50,000 years learning how to kill each other. Because you think mercy is weakness and surrender is shameful. Because when we offered peace, you replied with genocide." The display shifted, showing footage that made even the hardened Dominion crew recoil. Human worlds burning, cities melting under orbital bombardment, civilian evacuation ships torn apart by Dominion fighters. "Terra Nova," Volkov said quietly. "Population, 4 million. Your fleet glassed it from orbit while the children were still boarding the escape pods. My daughter was on Terra Nova, Captain. She was 8 years old. The footage changed again, showing a small human female with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile waving at the camera. Then the scene shifted to ash and molten glass where a city had once stood. That's when we learned something important about ourselves, Volkov continued. We learned that humans don't just fight wars. We end them, completely, permanently, with prejudice. On the tactical display, 3 merchant vessels broke cover from the debris field, burning hard for the system's edge. The Harbinger of Sorrows rotated with fluid grace, its weapon systems tracking the fleeing ships. Watch closely, Volkov said. This is what happens when you hunt a species that evolved from persistence predators. The human ship fired, not the massive energy volleys that Dominion vessels preferred, but small, precise projectiles that crossed the distance in seconds. The first merchant ship simply stopped. Its engines went dark, its hull lights failed, but it remained intact. Magnetic harpoons, Volkov explained conversationally, designed to disable rather than destroy. We want them alive for what comes. Next, Razorclaw's crew watched in horrified fascination as the Harbinger of Sorrows reeled in its catch like a fisher hauling in a net. Boarding pods launched from the human vessel, cutting through vacuum to attach themselves to the disabled merchant ship. No, whispered Navigator Kethmol. They're going to board them. They're going to learn, Volkov said, his voice carrying across the comm channel with terrible finality. Every crew member on every ship in this system is going to learn what it means to make war on humanity. And then they're going to die, one by one, until the only sounds in space are their screams and the silence that follows. The boarding began. Through the comm channels, they could hear it. The sound of airlocks being breached, the rapid staccato of human weapons, and underneath it all, the rising chorus of alien voices raised in terror and pain. Captain Vex Thun closed his eyes and began to pray to gods he'd never believed in, while the Harbinger of Sorrows continued its methodical harvest of the damned. The screaming had been going on for 43 minutes. Captain Vex Thun forced himself to watch as the Harbinger of Sorrows systematically worked its way through the merchant fleet. The human ship had perfected a grotesque ballet of death, disable, board, harvest, repeat. 7 vessels had been taken so far, their crews processed with industrial efficiency. Captain, Chief Engineer Morthek reported through the internal comm, his voice hollow. I've restored minimal power to secondary systems. We might be able to get a distress signal out if— Belay that, Vex Thun commanded, though his voice cracked with the words. He'd watched the last attempt to call for help. The moment Razorclaw's communications array had begun transmitting, the human ship had fired a single surgical shot that had vaporized their emergency beacon, along with the entire communications section and the 12 crew members inside it. On the main display, Commander Volkov continued his running commentary like a professor delivering a lecture on applied xenocide. Merchant Vessel 17 has been secured, he announced as his boarding parties dragged the last survivors from their hiding places. The crew is being processed according to the Geneva Convention amendments. Each will be interrogated regarding Dominion military assets, then executed humanely. The ship itself will be rigged with charges and used as a debris screen for our next engagement. You're monsters, breathed Navigator Kethmol, her compound eyes fixed on the tactical display. Demons from the void spaces between stars. Volkov's scarred face turned toward them, and for a moment, his expression softened with something that might have been genuine sadness. No, he said quietly. We're accountants. We're mathematicians. We're conducting a very precise calculation, and your species provided all the variables. The display shifted to show casualty figures, neat columns of numbers that told the story of 3 years of warfare. Human civilian casualties, 2.7 billion. Military losses, 890,000. Industrial infrastructure. destroyed 67% of all off-world colonies. When you started this war, Volkov continued, you made a fundamental error in calculation. You assumed that because humans are individually weaker than most Dominion species, we would be easier to defeat. You didn't account for force multiplication. New section of data appeared. Dominion losses over the past 18 months. The numbers were staggering. Entire fleets vanishing without trace, trade routes abandoned, core worlds under siege. What you failed to understand, Volkov said as another merchant vessel tried to break for hyperspace and was casually disabled, is that humans don't fight wars of conquest. We fight wars of extinction. When you killed our children, you didn't break our will to fight. You removed our reason to show mercy. The boarding pods were launching again, and with them came the sounds that had become all too familiar. Airlocks breaching, weapons fire, alien voices raised in terror and pain. But something had changed in the last few boardings. The screaming had taken on a different quality, not just fear, but pleading. The Dominion crews were begging, offering information, trying to surrender, and the humans were listening. Interesting, Volkov mused, studying data streaming across his display. It seems your merchant fleet Omega-7 was carrying more than just supplies. Codes, military intelligence, troop movement schedules for the next 6 months. Vex Thun felt his thorax constrict. The merchant fleet had been a cover operation. Dominion High Command had been using civilian vessels to transport critical military data, assuming the humans wouldn't target non-combatants. Captain Vex Thun, Volkov said, turning his attention back to Razorclaw. Your crew has been very patient. I imagine they're beginning to question the wisdom of their loyalty to the Dominion, perhaps wondering why their government uses merchants as shields for military operations. The Dominion captain said nothing, but around him he could hear the subtle sounds of his crew exchanging glances, mandibles clicking in hushed conversation. I'm going to make you an offer, Volkov continued. Something I've never offered a Dominion vessel before. Your ship is disabled, but not destroyed. Your crew is alive, but not for long. Your life support has maybe an hour left. I can offer you a choice that none of your fellow captains received. The main screen zoomed in on Volkov's face, and Vex Thun could see the coldness there, not the heat of anger, but the absolute zero of a star that had burned out long ago. Join us, the human said simply. Provide intelligence on Dominion fleet movements, supply routes, command structures. Help us end this war faster, with fewer casualties on both sides. In return, I'll evacuate your crew to a prison facility where they'll be treated according to the laws of war. And if we refuse? Vex Thun asked. Volkov's expression didn't change. Then you die here, slowly, while I finish processing the remaining merchant vessels. And tomorrow, when Dominion High Command wonders why Merchant Fleet Omega-7 never reached its destination, they'll send another fleet to investigate. And I'll kill them too. And the fleet after that. Until your entire species learns that there are consequences for making war on humanity. Around the bridge, Vex Thun could hear his crews breathing, the rapid, shallow gasps of beings confronting their own mortality. He thought of his clutch siblings back on the homeworld, of the eggs that would never hatch if the humans continued their inexorable advance. How long? He asked. How long for what? How long until you've killed us all? Until the Dominion is nothing but empty space and dead worlds? Volkov consulted his tactical display, running calculations with the same casual efficiency he'd shown throughout the engagement. At current rates of attrition, he said, approximately 14 months until total military collapse, 18 months until the surrender of your core worlds, 2 years until the last Dominion colony falls to human occupation. He looked directly into the camera, and for the first time, Vex Thun saw something human in those ice-cold eyes. Not warmth, but acknowledgement. One predator recognizing another. The mathematics are quite clear, Captain. Your species has 2, Choices: surrender now or be extinct within the decade. Those are the only variables that matter. The transmission ended, leaving Razorclaw's crew alone with their dying ship and the sounds of slaughter echoing from the merchant fleet. In the silence that followed, Captain Vex Thun began to understand why the humans were winning. The life support counter had reached 37 minutes when Chief Engineer Morthek reported through the intercom, his voice thick with resignation. "Captain, I've managed to restore partial power to the escape pods. We can evacuate maybe 60% of the crew before the pod's life support gives out." Captain Vex Thun stared at the tactical display, watching the Harbinger of Sorrows methodically work through the remaining merchant vessels. 14 ships left, and the human vessel showed no signs of fatigue or haste. Commander Volkov's crew worked with the same methodical precision they'd maintained for hours. Not the desperate fury of warriors, but the steady rhythm of professionals completing a job. "Sir," Navigator Kethmal whispered, her compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. "The crew is asking. They want to know what you've decided." Around the bridge, alien faces turned toward him, beings from a dozen different Dominion species, all united now by the prospect of imminent death. He could smell their fear pheromones, hear the subtle sounds of their various species' distress signals. But underneath it all was something else. Expectation. They were waiting for him to save them. "Open a channel to the human ship," he said, finally. The main screen flickered to life, showing Commander Volkov's scarred face. The human hadn't moved from his position at the tactical station, hadn't shown any signs of strain despite hours of combat operations. He looked like a machine that had been designed for one purpose: killing. "Captain Vex Thun," Volkov said without preamble, "have you reached a decision?" "I need guarantees," Vex Thun replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "My crew, they're not all military. Half of them are civilian contractors, technical specialists. They've never fired a shot in anger." "Irrelevant," Volkov said. "Every being on your ship is part of the Dominion war machine. Your civilian contractors maintain weapon systems used to glass human worlds. Your technical specialists calibrate the sensors that target our children. There are no non-combatants in this conflict. Your species made that decision when you declared total war." The screen split, showing footage from the merchant fleet boardings. Dominion crew members being processed with mechanical efficiency, questioned, cataloged, and then quietly executed with single shots to their primary neural clusters. No torture, no cruelty, just the simple mathematics of war carried to their logical conclusion. "However," Volkov continued, "I am authorized to offer terms for intelligence assets. Provide actionable intelligence on your fleet movements, supply, routes, and command structure, and your crew will be transferred to a prisoner of war facility. They will live. Not well, not comfortably, but they will live." "And after the war?" Vex Thun asked. For the first time, Volkov's expression shifted, not to warmth, but to something that might have been professional respect. "After the war, Captain, your species will exist only in the territories we allow you to exist in. Your military will be disbanded, your weapons destroyed, your colonies administered by human overseers. Those who survive will spend the rest of their lives learning what it means to be a client species." The words hung in the recycled air of Razorclaw's bridge like a funeral shroud. Everything the Dominion had built over centuries, the great fleets, the conquered worlds, the empire that had once spanned half the galaxy, reduced to servitude and submission. 23 minutes, Chief Engineer Morthek announced over the comm. "Life support failure in 23 minutes. "Captain, communications," Officer Thelnick said quietly. "I'm receiving personal messages from the crew. Recordings for their families in case—" "No," Vex Thun cut her off. "If we're going to live, we live as warriors. If we're going to die, we die with honor." He turned back to the main screen, meeting Volkov's cold gaze. "What intelligence do you want?" "Everything. the human replied. Start with Admiral Kethmaran's battle group. Location, strength, mission parameters. Then move on to the defense grids around your core worlds. Supply schedules for your forward bases. Anything and everything that will help us end this war faster. Vex Thun closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders, like a funeral shroud. When he opened them again, he saw his crew watching him, some with understanding, others with barely concealed horror. I need to address my crew first, he said. Volkov nodded. You have 5 minutes. The channel closed, leaving Vex Thun alone with his command. He stood slowly, his exoskeleton creaking with the effort, and activated the ship-wide intercom. All hands, this is the captain, he began, his voice carrying to every section of the dying ship. By now you all know our situation. Our ship is crippled, our weapons offline, our life support failing. We have 2 choices, die here with honor or live as prisoners of war. He paused, listening to the subtle sounds of a ship dying around him. The failing recyclers, the struggling power systems, the whispered conversations of crew members contemplating their mortality. I have decided to accept the human terms, he continued. I will provide intelligence to Commander Volkov in exchange for our lives. I know many of you will see this as betrayal, as cowardice. You are entitled to that opinion. But I will not. Watch my crew die for the sake of honor when their deaths will accomplish nothing. In the silence that followed, he could hear the weight of judgment settling over his ship like a gravitational field. Those who cannot live with this decision are free to take their own lives now, cleanly and with dignity. I will not think less of any being who makes that choice. For the rest of you, we will live. We will survive. And perhaps someday we will find a way to rebuild what we have lost. He closed the channel and reopened the link to the Harbinger of Sorrows. Commander. Volkov was waiting, his expression unchanged. Admiral Kethmaran, Vex Thun began, and with those words, sealed the fate of his people. The intelligence briefing lasted 18 minutes, just long enough for Vex Thun to provide the locations of 16 Dominion battle groups, the defensive, plans for 7 core worlds, and the complete supply schedule for the outer colonies. When it was over, Volkov nodded once. Transport pods are launching, he said. Your crew will be processed and transferred to POW Facility Sigma 7. You will not see them again until the war ends. As the first transport pods attached themselves to Razorclaw's hull, Captain Vex Thun realized that he had just witnessed the moment when the Dominion truly lost the war, not on a battlefield, but in the heart of a dying ship, when a captain chose survival over honor. The harvest of defeat had begun. 6 months after the massacre, at Merchant Fleet Omega-7, the war began to collapse like a dying star. Admiral Kethmaran stood on the bridge of his flagship Apex of Dominion, watching the tactical display that showed the systematic dismantling of everything he had sworn to protect. 16 battle groups, exactly the number Captain Vex Thun had revealed to the humans, had been destroyed in carefully orchestrated ambushes. 7 core worlds had fallen to human siege tactics that exploited defensive weaknesses only the Dominion's own commanders had known. Report, he demanded, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Fleet Group Tau was intercepted at the Nexus Point 3. Hours ago, his aide-de-camp reported, her young voice trembling. No survivors. The humans were waiting for them with precise intelligence on their jump coordinates and formation dispersal patterns. The Admiral closed his primary eyes, feeling the weight of 1,000 tactical decisions that had led to this moment. Every move he'd made, every strategy he'd employed, had been anticipated and countered with surgical precision. The humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating that the war had been over since the moment Vex Thun opened his mouth. How many ships do we have left? He asked. Across all remaining battle groups? Maybe 300 effective units. The humans have neutralized or captured everything else. 300 ships, Once, the Dominion had fielded 30,000 warships across a dozen sectors. Now they were reduced to running and hiding like scavengers in the deep dark between stars. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission. It's from the humans." The main display activated, showing a familiar scarred face. Commander Volkov looked older than he had 6 months ago. Lines of exhaustion etched around his ice-cold eyes. But there was something else there now. Not satisfaction, but the quiet finality of a job nearly done. "Admiral Kethmoran," Volkov said without preamble, "by now you understand that this war is over. Your fleets are broken, your supply lines severed, your core worlds under siege. I'm transmitting terms for your surrender." The display shifted to show a document, pages of precise legal language that spelled out the complete capitulation of the Galactic Dominion, territorial concessions, military restrictions, reparations that would take centuries to pay. "These terms are non-negotiable," Volkov continued. "You have 72 hours to signal your acceptance. After that time, we will consider any remaining Dominion forces to be hostile combatants and will act accordingly." Admiral Kethmoran studied the surrender document, feeling the weight of history settling on his shoulders. Everything his species had built, everything they had conquered, everything they had dreamed of becoming, reduced to a legal document written by the very beings they had once dismissed as weak. "And if we refuse?" he asked. Though he already knew the answer, Volkov's expression didn't change. "Then we continue the war until your species is extinct. We have no preference either way, Admiral. Surrender or extinction. The mathematics work out the same for us." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Around him, Kethmoran could see his officers struggling with the implications of what they'd just heard. These weren't terms of surrender. They were terms of permanent subjugation. "Admiral," his aide-de-camp whispered, "what are your orders?" Kethmoran looked at the tactical display one last time, seeing the scattered remnants of the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known. 300 ships against humanity's inexorable advance. It wasn't even a contest anymore. It was just the mathematics of extinction playing out in real time. "Signal all remaining fleet elements," he said finally. "We fight. We die as warriors, not as slaves." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was meaningless. The war was already over. It had been over since the moment humans learned to hunt. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, the harbinger of sorrows continued its methodical patrol of the outer rim, now accompanied by a fleet of identical black ships. The human fleet had grown, fed by the resources of captured worlds and the strategic intelligence provided by defeated enemies. Commander Volkov stood on his bridge, studying reports from across the front lines. The last major Dominion fleet had been located and would be engaged within 48 hours. After that, only scattered resistance remained, pirates and holdouts who would be hunted down over the coming months. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a message from Admiral Kethmoran. He's rejecting our surrender terms." Volkov nodded, unsurprised. "Transmit his coordinates to Fleet Groups Alpha through Delta. Full tactical engagement, no survivors." "Yes, sir." As the orders went out, Volkov turned to look at the memorial wall that had been installed on his bridge. Thousands of names etched in metal, representing the human civilians who had died in the opening moves of the war. His daughter's name was there, along with all the others who would never see the end of this conflict. "Commander," his tactical officer called out, "Fleet Group Alpha reports successful engagement. Admiral Kethmoran's flagship has been destroyed. The Dominion fleet is completely eliminated." Volkov studied the tactical display, watching as the last red icons disappeared from the screen. After 3 years of warfare, after millions of casualties, on both sides, the Galactic Dominion had finally been reduced to empty space and scattered debris. "Status of remaining holdouts?" he asked. 17 minor fleets scattered across the outer territories. Estimated time to complete pacification, 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months to finish what had started with the death of a single human child. Volkov thought about the mathematics Commander Wraith had discussed. The calculation of force and response, action and consequence. The Dominion had started this war believing they were hunting prey. They had ended it learning what it meant to be hunted by a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of persistence predation. Humans didn't just fight wars, they ended them. Completely, permanently, with mathematical precision. Signal all fleet elements, Volkov commanded. Begin final sweep operations. I want every holdout located and eliminated within 90 days. The war ends when the last Dominion ship burns. As the harbinger of sorrows turned toward the outer darkness, following the scent of its remaining prey, Volkov allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The mathematics had worked out exactly as predicted. The only variable that had mattered was time, and time, like everything else in this war, belonged to humanity now. 3 months after the destruction of Admiral Kethmaran's fleet, the universe had grown very quiet. Commander Volkov stood in the observation deck of the Harbinger of Sorrows, watching as the last known Dominion outpost burned against the star field. The installation had held out for 6 weeks, longer than most, but in the end it had fallen to the same methodical siege tactics that had claimed every other stronghold. "That's the last of them, sir," his executive officer reported. "Sensors show no remaining Dominion military assets in this sector or any adjacent systems." Volkov nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the current state of what had once been the Galactic Dominion. Red zones marked former military installations, now destroyed or abandoned. Yellow zones indicated civilian populations under human administration. Green zones showed the growing network of human colonies spreading across former Dominion territory. The transformation had been remarkably efficient. In less than 4 years, humanity had gone from a species barely clinging to survival to the dominant power in this spiral arm of the galaxy. It wasn't conquest in the traditional sense. It was replacement, conducted with the same systematic precision that characterized everything humans did. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." The main display activated, showing Fleet Admiral Reeves, the architect of humanity's war strategy and the person who had given Volkov his first hunting license. The Admiral looked older than her years, gray-haired and worn down by the weight of decisions that had reshaped galactic civilization. "Commander Volkov," she said, "congratulations on completing the final sweep. I'm officially declaring the Dominion War concluded as of this date. All remaining hostile assets have been eliminated or neutralized." Volkov felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. For so long, his purpose had been crystal clear: find the enemy, eliminate the enemy, move to the next target. Now, with no enemies left to hunt, he found himself wondering what came next. "Orders, Admiral?" he asked. Reeves smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth Volkov had seen from her since the war began. "That's up to you, Commander. The Harbinger and her crew have served with distinction beyond measure. You've earned the right to choose your next assignment." The transmission ended, leaving Volkov alone with his thoughts and the view of burning wreckage outside his window. He thought about his daughter. Not the ash and memory she had become, but the bright-eyed child who had once asked him why people fought wars. Because sometimes, he had told her, fighting is the only way to protect the things we love. He had protected everything now. Humanity was safe, expanding, thriving. The galaxy had been made secure for human children to grow and learn and ask questions about why people fought wars. His daughter would never see that future, but millions of other children would. "Sir," his executive officer asked quietly, "what are your orders?" Volkov turned from the observation window, looking at his crew. the men and women who had followed him through 3 years of methodical slaughter. They had become something unprecedented in human history, perfect killers who had never lost their humanity. They had hunted an entire species to extinction while maintaining military discipline, following rules of engagement, and treating prisoners according to the laws of war. Set course for the Kepler station, he decided. It's time we learned how to be human again. But as the harbinger of sorrows began its journey toward the heart of human space, Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that their work wasn't truly finished. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, other species were watching humanity's rise with growing concern. The Dominion War had been a statement, a demonstration of what happened when humanity was pushed to its limits. The question now was whether anyone had been listening. 5 years after the last Dominion ship burned in the void, Commander Volkov, now Director of Colonial Security, stood before the Galactic Council on the neutral station of Haven's Rest. The chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species, all of them carefully avoiding direct eye contact with the human delegation. The war was over, but its lessons echoed through every conversation, every treaty negotiation, every trade agreement. Humanity had earned its place at the galactic table, not through diplomacy, but through the simple mathematics of superior firepower applied with surgical precision. The human representative will now address the matter of territorial expansion, announced the council moderator, a spindly creature from the ethereal collective whose translucent features betrayed no emotion. Volkov rose slowly, his scarred face impassive as he surveyed the assembled aliens. Many of them were old enough to remember when humanity was considered a minor nuisance, a young species barely worthy of notice. Now they hung on his every word with the careful attention of prey, animals watching a predator. The Terran Federation has no interest in further expansion at this time, he said, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. Our current territorial holdings are sufficient for our projected population growth over the next 50 years. Collective sigh of relief rippled through the alien representatives. The humans had been expanding steadily since the war's end, claiming former Dominion worlds and establishing new colonies at a rate that alarmed their neighbors. The assurance that this expansion would slow was welcome news. However, Volkov continued, and the chamber fell silent again. We will respond to any act of aggression against human interests with the same level of force that we applied to the Dominion. We have demonstrated our capacity for total warfare. We have no desire to demonstrate it again, but we will if necessary. The ambassador from the crystalline hegemony, a species that had once considered humanity beneath their notice, raised a tentative appendage. Director Volkov, the hegemony wishes to propose a formal non-aggression pact with the Terran Federation. We believe that... No, Volkov said simply. The word hung in the recycled air like a death sentence. The ambassador's crystalline features flickered with confused light patterns. Forgive me, Director, but I don't understand. Surely a non-aggression pact would benefit both our species. A non-aggression pact implies that we consider your species a potential threat, Volkov explained with the patience of a teacher addressing a slow student. We don't. The crystalline hegemony poses no more threat to humanity than a population of herbivores poses to a pack of wolves. You are welcome to exist in territories we don't require, trade with us on terms we find acceptable, and participate in galactic civilization, under the framework we have established. But we will not pretend that you are our equals by signing treaties that suggest otherwise. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, translators struggling to keep up with the flood of outrage and protest. Volkov waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing. The Dominion War taught us something important about galactic civilization, he said once quiet had been restored. Every species in this chamber either supported the Dominion's genocidal campaign against humanity or stood by and did nothing while they attempted to exterminate us. When we were weak, you ignored us. When we were threatened, you abandoned us. When we were dying, you profited from our suffering." He gestured toward the memorial hologram that had been installed in the human section of the chamber, a slowly rotating display showing the names of every human civilian killed in the war. 4 billion dead, he said quietly. Men, women, children. Killed not in battle, but in systematic extermination campaigns designed to erase humanity from the galaxy. And where was the Galactic Council? Where were the peacekeepers? Where were the voices of moral authority that now demand we show restraint? The silence that followed was deafening. In the 5 years since the war's end, not a single alien species had acknowledged their complicity in the Dominion's crimes. Not one had offered assistance to the human refugees. Not one had spoken against the genocide while it was happening. "We learned that in the real universe," Volkov continued, "there is no morality. There is no justice. There are only the strong and the weak, the hunter and the hunted. The Dominion thought they were hunters. They learned otherwise. The rest of you have apparently not absorbed that lesson." The representative from the Ethereal Collective, a species that had provided intelligence support to the Dominion throughout the early stages of the war, attempted to interject. "Director Volkov, surely you cannot hold all of galactic civilization, responsible for the actions of a single species." "Can't I?" Volkov asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Let me tell you what I can do, Ambassador. I can provide you with a complete tactical analysis of every species in this chamber, fleet strengths, defensive capabilities, industrial capacity, population centers. I can show you exactly how long it would take humanity to eliminate each of your civilizations if we chose to do so." He activated his personal display, showing a series of calculations that made several alien representatives physically recoil. The Ethereal Collective. 18 months until complete military collapse, assuming no external assistance. The Crystalline. Hegemony. 11 months, complicated by your distributed command structure but ultimately manageable. The Tentacled Commonwealth, 4 months, due to their reliance on easily disrupted supply lines. The numbers continued, each calculation presented with the same dispassionate precision that had characterized humanity's approach to the Dominion War. By the time he finished, several representatives had quietly left the chamber. "This is the mathematics of galactic civilization as it actually exists," Volkov concluded. "Not as you pretend it exists, not as your philosophers and ethicists claim it should exist, but as it actually functions. Humanity has accepted these mathematics. We suggest you do the same." He gathered his materials and stood to leave, but paused at the chamber entrance. "One final point," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "The human species evolved on a world where survival required cooperation, planning, and the ability to pursue prey across vast distances until it collapsed from exhaustion. We are persistence predators who learned to work together. The Dominion tried to hunt us and discovered what it means to be hunted by a species that never, ever gives up." He looked directly at each alien representative in turn, his scarred face reflecting the cold light of distant stars. "You can run from humanity if you choose, but you'll only die tired and screaming in the deep space between stars. That's not a threat. It's simply the mathematics of what we are." As Director Volkov left the chamber, the assembled representatives of galactic civilization sat in stunned silence, finally understanding the new reality that had emerged from the ashes of the Dominion War. The age of human dominance hadn't begun with conquest or expansion. It had begun with a simple equation. Those who hunt humans learn what it means to be prey. And the mathematics, as always, were perfectly clear. In the years that followed, the galaxy would learn to live with this new reality. Some species would thrive under human protection. Others would fade into irrelevance. But all would remember the lesson of the Dominion War. that there are consequences for threatening a species that spent 50,000 years learning how to kill. The black ships still patrolled the outer darkness, their crews standing ready to remind the galaxy that humanity had not forgotten how to hunt. They served as a constant reminder that peace was not the absence of war. It was simply the mathematics of deterrence, applied with lethal precision. Commander Volkov's daughter would never see the future that emerged from her death. But she had become something more powerful than any individual life. She had become the equation that balanced the scales of galactic civilization. And in the cold mathematics of space, that was a form of immortality that no force in the universe could ever erase.